share my screen, and we are going to dive in. All right. So this week we're going to continue on with the things we've been talking about in terms of learning JavaScript, getting familiar with working with it. But this week's going to be focused more on getting JavaScript to do stuff for us in the browser. Last week was really focused on the fundamentals of the language. But this week we're going to focus on getting the JavaScript language to do stuff for us in the context of building websites. And I found this little tweet today, and it made me chuckle. And so I wanted to share it with you before we started and dove in. She says, I don't use Git. I don't even store code in files. I just remember it and type it in every time. That made me laugh. Cool. All right, so let's first dive into JavaScript debugging. Now that you guys have had an opportunity to play with JavaScript a little bit, and you've started exploring, like, I've got to write code and get it to do things, I wanted to take a little bit of time and really dive in on the fundamentals of how we're going to debug our programs and understand how to fix problems that come up, how to understand what is happening, because these tools are going to be essential to you for the entirety of your career, right, as we continue playing. So the first one is console.log method. We've been playing with this pretty frequently. And so if we were doing things like, we write a for loop here, and we say var I equals 0, I is less than 10, I plus plus, right? We'll use console.log inside of loops and inside of functions to just get a sense for where we are and what's happening, right? So, we'll pretty frequently, I'll say, let's log out what is happening. And what that means is just literally type in console.log, and maybe we say, I is currently plus I, right? And so we'll do this kind of thing all the time. And so if we were to pull up, let's pull this page up here, open with live server. We pull up our little debugging tool. So this is pretty much how we're going to use console.log. Especially as we continue to build more and more complex products, and as we use JavaScript in unique and interesting ways, console.log is your friend, because at any time, you can write a single line of code that says, hey, log this, show me what the current value is, right? It's very useful for seeing what a variable is inside of a bunch of different functions, right? If we had something that was in here like this, we said it was a function that was like run cool loop, right? And it took a variable like counter, right? We might have our loop in here, and we are not sure what the value of the counter is. So we might come in here and put in a log that says console.log starting loop, right? And we might put one at the end that says, ending loop. And then anytime we need to debug this, right, if we're in here trying to work through what's happening, why is it going wrong, I would urge you to liberally use console.log. Sprinkle it everywhere, right? Before you finish and publish your product, you want to take out all these debugging statements, all these log calls, so that you're not exposing what's happening behind the scenes to the world and cluttering things up. But when you're building something, if we wanted to see, run cool loop, we put in 15, right? 16. If this was, if we said I is less than counter, right? Then anytime we run our program, it will tell us, hey, we've entered the loop. It's telling us what the value is of I as we go, and it's telling us when we exit it, right? So console.log is your friend. What is another way that we can debug our JavaScript? We've seen this. We've kind of played with it a few times. We were trying to sort through some of our nested loops. Do you guys remember another tool that we might use? Andrew, do you have any ideas? We've explored it briefly, but we're going to dive in and really understand what makes it tick.
Nothing's coming to mind.
Okay. We've played with the JavaScript debugger. It's built in to our console here. And the easiest way to get into this, this is how we were doing it. We would click on the line of code and then add a breakpoint. So if we wanted to come in here and say, every time this runs, right, if this line is blue, you can see that over on the right, we've added a breakpoint. Okay. And that's going to operate kind of how console.log is acting for us, right? So instead of what we've been doing before is printing out every line to the console, but what we do with this is when we reload the page with that breakpoint set, it's going to tell us we've paused on this breakpoint, and then we have a few different controls that let us see let us like step through and walk through the code. Okay, so you can see in this version, right? It's telling us that the current value of counter that we passed in down here is 16. Right, so then it's saying for I is 0 and the counter is 16, right, loop through this. And so we can see I is currently, and it's going to say I. And then we have this button here, F9, which is step. That just means go to the next line. So if we hit F9 or we click this step button, you can see that it goes back to the top, and now I equals 0. It does I++, and if we step again, we just keep clicking step. Now I is 1, right? So this is a really cool way to see what everything is happening behind the scenes. Okay? And you can kind of watch the flow as it goes. Okay? Now there are a couple other interesting functions inside this debugger, and these are going to be functions you're going to see in lots of different debuggers you use, whether you're working in JavaScript or Visual Studio or any of these other IDEs that you may have exposure to, is that you can choose to step over, right? And that just means like, okay, I understand what's going here. Step until the next thing is called, which is going to just kind of do the same thing. But you can also step out of, right? So you can say, leave this, right? So now you can see it's not going line by line. It's going to the next iteration. That's step out of current function. And then step into, right? So in general, most of what you're going to use most of the time is step, which is going to just take you line by line, give you a sense of what's going on. But then when you're done here, you can just click, resume, right? And then it's going to go back to just working on its own. There's another way we can access the debugger and have it happen in our code. And it's been a while since I've used this, so let's just make sure we're doing this right. I think if you type debugger on its own line like that, with a semicolon, that's going to tell the browser to do that debugger, okay? And so if we run this right now, yeah, you can see that it stopped at that debugger line. So anytime if you're just working in your code and you want to be able to quickly say, hey, stop right here and let the debugger take over, that's a really cool way to do that. And so really all you have to remember is at any time you can use the statement debugger, and it will enter you into the debugger mode. Right? Let's take off this breakpoint. So right now I have no breakpoints, so this is not going to do anything. The page is just going to run. But if we do the debugger here, right, kind of how we can see this working is, right, so it stopped here. If you go to our console, you'll notice it's printed nothing yet. But if we go back to our application, where was it at? Yeah, right here. If we continue pressing F9 a few times, right, it's going to be looping through that. Over here in the console, you can see it's going line by line as if that loop was running really fast, right? So we can keep going back over here, hit F9 a bunch of times, or click this button a bunch of times, and you'll see that behind the scenes, this is doing all of those steps of the loop. Right, you guys? Does that make sense to you? This is a really powerful tool, especially when you start building more and more complex programs. Leah's was a great example. We were playing with the poker thing the other night. We were trying to figure out what was happening. This would have been an excellent tool to like start as soon as it called draw card, see what the first line was doing, see what the second line was doing, and we could see the values of those arrays at every step along the way. We did it the hard and inefficient way, which was like putting in a bunch of console.logs, but this would have been quicker and more efficient, right? This is an extremely powerful tool. And it's really important to note that this type of debugging is going to follow you around whether you're working in JavaScript or in other programming languages in the future. These words step over, step into, or step, those are going to be identical regardless of what environment you're working in. So it's important to know what they do. The big one is step, which is just going to go line by line. And this you can even see when if we had, let's add a few extra lines in here. We could do like document dot get element by ID, like whatever test. Okay, and we'll say var L equals, and then we come in here and say return EL, right? And so if we make ourselves a little test element down here, let's say h1 ID equals test. Ha, that's not a tag. And then we come in here and say, whatever, var h1l equals, okay? And we can continue to have things like h1l dot style dot background color equals blue, right? So if we have our debugger here, this line is going to do this. And if we pull up our debugger here, more tools, right? It stops there, but you can see that stepping is going to loop through all these things, and then it's going to continue to go on down your script, right? So if you've got a complex program that has a whole bunch of functionality, this is a really good way to just go line by line and see what's happening. And eventually, in theory, when you get really good at programming, you can kind of do this stuff in your head, right? You should be writing code where you know what it does. We'll just hit F9 a bunch of times. 13, 14, 15, 16. And then it goes get element by ID. It's going to return it. And then it's going to change the background color to blue. And there we go. Cool. Everyone following along? No, I didn't. I must not have written code correctly. Let's see what happened here. That's the wrong file. ID test. Get element by ID test. Return ID. Oh, because this didn't exist yet, right? We wrote JavaScript before the HTML had even loaded, right? So this would need to go down in here if we wanted to see this update the code to be blue. Let's make this 4 so that we don't have to loop so many times. So now if we're in here, we reload our page, right? Step. It's going to get to 4, and then it's going to change the background color of that to blue, right? So line by line, this debugger is super powerful to let us just see what's going on. Okay. So we can get there with this debugger command, right? It's a single statement. We just put it in with a semicolon, and wherever this line of code is in your JavaScript, it's going to pause the execution and let you go in and step through it. Okay. You do not want to leave these lines of code when you're publishing something online. So if you're building your portfolio or you're working in your future jobs, you want to make sure that you go through. You definitely want to take out anything that says debugger, but you probably want to remove most of your console.logs as well. Okay. All right, what's next? There's a whole bunch of other functionality in here where you can set up a whole bunch of variables and have them be set to watch. Let's see if we can get this to work. Let's just add a thing in here. Okay, and we can say, for var I. Yeah. So we can add a watch expression, and we'd say I. Oh, we have to make it something that's available in here. So let's add a variable up here. I'll show you how this works. So instead of having var I in here, where that's our iterator, if we wanted to watch something happen and watch for changes and things, we could define it in the window, right? And so we can say I equals 0. So now we've made this a global variable to our JavaScript, and then we can come in here and add that as a value. Right? So we can, I have to reload. So I can say I. All right, so I is 0. It's going to show us that variable, and as this runs through the loop, right, that should, you can see it's updating that variable. So we can also watch variables and watch, as an example, the array of cards that Leah had in her product, right? We could say watch card list, watch cards in deck, right? Those two arrays that we cared about, and we could see how those were changing every time we click a button, right? It doesn't even have to be in the debugger, right? This could be, we can exit out of here, right? And you can see that I is 4 right now, and if that ever changed, right? If we came in here and said I, which we know has 4, we can say I equals 10. And then if we're back over on this tab, it will show 10. You might have to click this refresh if you're not on this tab, this little refresh thing. But it's going to let us know where everything is. And it's kind of hard to see because I have this at the bottom of my screen here. But sometimes, especially if you got multiple monitors, you might want to actually undock this, right? If you undock to a separate window, I might have this on a separate screen over here so that I can watch a whole bunch of stuff and interact with my app on the other monitor. Okay? You guys can kind of see the power of that. Let's put this back in my dock so I don't lose it. Cool. Cool. All right. So we've been learning JavaScript as a language, and now it's really time to dive into JavaScript in the context of doing stuff with the web pages. So there's one concept that we really need to understand right off the bat is that, as I've been stating, everything in JavaScript in the browser is an object, right? And it starts with this kind of tree structure. I don't know if you guys can see that very well. Let's see if we can make it full screen. So at the top level, the global object, the one we've been playing with when we make a variable and we don't have it inside of another object, is going to exist in the window object, okay? Inside of the window object, we're going to have all kinds of methods that let us do stuff with the page. And let's look at a few of those real quick. We'll come back to this. So like one great example is if we were playing with window.href, right? Document. How would we get to this? Let's see. Let's just look at what the window object has in it, right? Oh, this is a bad example because theirs is full of nonsense. So if we come over here and we look at window, window has a whole bunch of things in it, right? So the alert function, right? For example, whenever we call alert, let me get to the thing. Gosh, why is it so big? Right? So alert is a function that exists in the window. We've been talking about, like, remember when we were talking about, like, the structure of our HTML page has a body, and that means it's everything in here. And then some of the stuff that happens in our head is meta information that, like, defines the title of the page, right? So the window object is kind of like that. It's the entirety of this browser interface from top to bottom. So inside window, you're going to have things that happen outside of the page, right? So like alert, for example. This is in the window object. So we can type window.alert, hello, right? And you'll notice this is popping up outside of our browser panel here, the part that's white, right? This has actually stopped all execution so that nothing, I can't click anything else on this page until I click this OK. Window is the parent object in which everything exists. Other important things, and this is it, like today might be a really good time to take some notes because a lot of this stuff you just have to know where it's at and know what it's called. So one of the ones we've learned about alert, we've learned about confirm, right? That's another function that's in here, right? That one asks you yes or no questions, right? Like confirm yes, right? It gives you an OK or cancel. And then does anyone remember the third type of pop-up message we learned about? Estrella, do you remember that one? It was like alert and confirm, but
not off the top of my head.
Okay. Does anyone remember?
Warning?
Nope. That's a good guess, though. It was one that lets you gather any information from the user, right? So alert was
Input.
just a yes. Go ahead, Gregory.
Is it error?
Nope. Those are things in the console object I think you're thinking of. Console.
Okay.
Error. We're talking about there were three types of pop-ups that were in the window object. We had alert, which was a yes question. Confirm, which was a yes or no question. And then there was one that let you type words in. Do you guys remember that one?
Boy.
I remember seeing it, but I don't know.
It starts with a P. Window.prompt.
Oh, prompt. You know I was.
So we can say, what's your name? What is your name? Right? Okay. So those are three of the things that exist in the window object. Another one that you're going to use all the time. So definitely remember this. There's another special object in here called window.location. And window.location is an object that tells you about the website address of the page you're on. And it has a whole bunch of information in there that you'll need to be able to access and use, right? So right now, if I do window.location.href, right? So ahref, it's the hypertext reference. It's going to tell you this is the full URL of the page I'm on. Okay. What's interesting about this is this value is always going to match what is in this little location bar, even if it's been updated, right? So you remember we could do in-page links, and it was with the hashtag or the pound sign. So it could be like fun title, right? If I type window.location.href now, it's going to have that in here. Okay? Window.location also has, let's look at all the ones it has. It has it broken down by information, right? So it has the host name. So this is the address of the server, right? So this one is 127.0.0.1. It's got an IP address in there. It also has a port, 5500. But if we went to, let's say, google.com, right, and we type in window.location.href, it's going to say google.com. But it's going to say the full version, window.location, right? So you can see the host is google.com. The host name is that. If we put in href, it's going to give us the full, including HTTPS, okay? Protocol is an important one. If you're building a product that has an SSL version where all the data is encrypted, you might need to check to make sure, hey, if I am not on a protocol HTTPS, reload me to HTTPS so that you can always make sure that you're sending a secure. If you're a bank website or something, you might write code that redirects you using this. Other thing, so we put in a query parameter here, right? So, so they call that window.location.hash, right? So window.location.hash is going to tell us fun title. One of the things that we used to do with JavaScript is that we would update this value using location.hash equals, and I'll say something like hello Andrew, right? And so now what's going to happen, as soon as I hit enter, if you keep your eyes up here for this little tiny text, I can't make this any bigger, this is going to change to hello Andrew. So with JavaScript, without ever leaving the page, I can add stuff into the history of the browser, right? You can see how I got the front and back arrows, but nothing on the page has reloaded. So this is an interesting way when we're making dynamic applications. You might add stuff into the pages, into the browser's history, so that the user can use their forward and back arrows, but that doesn't actually cause the page to reload or do anything differently, right? Oh, see, it's debugging again. Turn this off. Get out of here. So we can use window.location.hash to set anything we want up here. We can say like hello world, right? And now if we actually look at the history, where we see history, right? Right? So these are all those 3 entries that have information. Window.location.href is also how you get your browser to go to a new page. So we're on Google right now. If I come in here and I type window.location.href and I say yahoo.com, right? Now as soon as I hit enter, yahoo.com, oh, I have to give it the full path name, right? So I have to put in https:// and now I'm at Yahoo, right? So we can navigate with JavaScript, and you're going to do that kind of thing pretty often. When we're working on JavaScript, we might have a whole bunch of links up here that we want to, if we click it, we sometimes want it to load a different page, like if we had an about, right? We can use native HTML to give us links. We've learned how to do that with what tag gives us a link. What's the name of it? Leah? What is our link tag?
A.
A, and do you remember what A stands for? What the letter A
Anchor.
means? Anchor. Yeah. So we can do this with HTML perfectly. Like one thing that you might want to do, just to give you a real concrete example, let's come in here and add. Oh gosh, I'm going to close this so I don't keep doing that. It's going to drive me crazy. All right, let's add an anchor tag in here. All right, so we're going to say anchor href equals some cool website, no JavaScript, right? .html, no JavaScript link, right? We might write code that says, hey, if the browser doesn't have JavaScript, if I'm dealing with someone who has JavaScript turned off, or they have a disability, maybe they've got these kind of things disabled, if I click on this link, it would load that page. Cool website, no JavaScript, right? But what we might do is we might come into JavaScript here and say, we might add it on click event, right? So we'll say function link click with JavaScript, right? And I'll say window.location.href equals cool website JavaScript.html, right? And so we can come in here and put on click equals link click with JavaScript, right? So if I have JavaScript turned on my browser, when I click on this, it's taking me to it would take me to cool. Oh, we'd have to disable. Let's see. So do event prevent default. I'll do that real quick. Okay. Cool. Link click. Yeah. So we're going to cover events later on, probably today even. But what I've done essentially, without doing anything really cool, is I've said if I've got JavaScript, JavaScript is going to control what page I go to. If I don't have JavaScript, if I had JavaScript, like let's add a JavaScript toggle thing here. Let's go to Node.js, toggle JS. JavaScript. Oh, I have to go to the store, huh? What do I add extensions at? Open Chrome Web Store. So what I'm going to do is this is another useful browser plugin you should probably get, especially as you're developing with JavaScript, is it lets you turn on so let's say JavaScript toggle. Yeah, here, we want this one. So we add to Chrome, and what this is going to give us is a little button up here in the top right, where if I click this button, it's going to turn JavaScript off, right? So I'm in here right now. JavaScript is on. We click this. We're going to cool website JavaScript. If I come in here and I click this, and let's pin this to our thing, right? I turned off JavaScript now, and now I'm going to the no JavaScript version. So we can use JavaScript to control where we send people, even if they've clicked something. This is perfectly acceptable, accessible websites in that it does something without JavaScript. But now we've added extra functionality so that if I've got JavaScript or if I'm using a browser that is reliable, something cool is going to happen, right? We could have put another page over there that maybe does animations and things like that. Okay. And so that is that is one of the things that's in the window object, right? What are some other things in window? Let's just look through here and see what all this is a pretty big object, and so if we're going to use our console as an object inspector here, right? We might want to just type in window and see what all we have here, right? We also have window.close, which, as I'm sure you'd imagine, you can actually close this entire browser, right? But I think it will prompt them. But there's a whole bunch of stuff in here. Other things, let's close this out. Let's present again. Right, so inside window is the main thing that we've been, I have JavaScript turned off. Okay. Present. All right, so inside window, the thing you're going to use a lot of is document. All right, whenever we talk about document, that's everything that starts at HTML and ends at your closing HTML tag. So the document itself is a child of the window object and is going to have a lot of information about the content of your page. Okay, so there's a whole bunch of different things in here because we used to write JavaScript to navigate the page differently before we had all these ID attributes and get element attributes. It used to be that you'd come in here and say, document dot links, right? And this is going to give you all of the links that were on the page, right? So it's an HTML collection. An HTML collection we're going to see this when we learn about some of the functions for how do we access elements in here, is going to behave kind of like an array, right? So what is one of the ways we learned to iterate through an array last week? We learned a couple different ways.
You could just use a loop.
Yeah, right? So we could do for var I equals 0, I is less than, document dot links dot length, right? I plus plus. And then we could say, document dot links I dot style dot color equals red, or red is good, right? So this is going to loop through every link on this page and change the color to red. Okay, and you can see, we only have one link, but it did it, right? So you can access specific elements like links, forms, and anchors directly under document, right? So we can say, if we had a form on this page, we'd be able to say document.forms. It's empty right now because we don't have any forms on the page. We could also do document.anchor, right? Which also is empty. So this would be in-page links if we wanted to reference all the spots that are, when we were saying I've got a paragraph down here, I want to be able to link to it. They would call that an anchor. Inside of the form, so if you continue to go down this object tree, right? So if we do document.forms text area, that would be all the text areas, all the selects, all the options. This is the structure that is being built behind the scenes in the document object model, right? That's what this stands for, document object model. It's saying the document exists, and this is one of the reasons why when we're talking about HTML, a lot of tags have closing tags, and they have tags that can exist within itself, like an unordered list will have 10 or 15 list index elements, LIs, right? Those are creating a tree of nodes that you can navigate this way. Okay? JavaScript, even from its earliest days, was really built to interact with and change the content of web pages. So as we were working with a web page, what started as a static collection of document, it was just a document, you'd read it. JavaScript was our programming language developed and designed really to change things and make that page interactive, right? We talked about the window object, the document object. I think the document object is probably the most interesting one because that's where a lot of our best functions are going to come from, the ones we're going to use all the time. Can someone tell me one document function that we've used over and over and over again?
Get element by ID.
Yeah, document.getElement by ID, right? This is going to give us a single element, and you can tell that it's giving you one element because it's singular, right? Get element by ID. If it's something that's going to return, perhaps 2 or more, it's going to be elements, and we'll look at a few of those as well. And so if we put in test, which I think was that's our H1, right? It's going to return that to us. We can get whenever you see get, you have to think that this function is expecting to send something outside of itself. So we can always come in and say var l equals document.getElement by ID test, and now el, this variable, has that element inside of it. Okay. What's another one? We've kind of looked at a few of them, but not in depth, though we are today. Does anyone know any other ones?
Query selector.
Oh yeah, that's a good one. We're going to look at that one for sure. So that would be document.getElement. So query selector. And if I put in H1, right, it's going to do something very similar to that previous one, right? So I could do var el equals this, right? But the problem is query selector is going to always give you one element back, the first element that matches your CSS selector. So when we're in here writing CSS, if we were to come in here and say new file, right? Let's just add this real quick. Link rel. So we've learned that we can write query selectors to any level of specificity we want. We've played with ones that are like H1, right? That's, I can say background color blue. Right? I could say H1 test and say background color green. Right? What color do we think the background color of that H1 element is going to be based on these two CSS rules?
Green.
Do you guys remember specificity? Green?
Mm-hmm.
Let's see. Oh, it's blue because we changed it with JavaScript. Let's take that out. In here. Where did we do it? Yeah, right here. All right, so yeah, it's green. Unless we have JavaScript that cheats and overrides it. So anything that is a valid CSS selector, and you remember we can make these as complex or as simple as we want. We could have, body H1 tests. If it had a class in here, we might do it that way. So anything that is a valid CSS selector, we can use the document.query selector and then paste in that string, right? Body H1 hashtag test, right? So it's going to use any valid CSS selector will work in here. Now there's one important thing to note. Let's come in here and let's see an example. So I'll say let's add 2 paragraph tags, right? Paragraph, and we'll say class equals look. Say first paragraph. Let's just copy this so we got an easy one. All right, let's say so. Second. So we know that in CSS we can come in here and say look, right? That's any paragraph tag that has the look class applied to it. We can come in here and say, background color 333 border 1px solid red, right? So that's going to apply to both of these paragraphs. Let's make color white as well, right? So it's easy to see. Color FFF padding 25px, right? So these are our 2 paragraphs, and it works perfectly. But if we use document.query selector and we say p.test, p.look, right? It is only ever going to return the first element in the page that matches that. Okay? Query selector will match one element at a time, or nothing. Right? If it doesn't find it, right, when I typed in p.test, it's going to return null if there is no selector that matches. There is another document function that will return all elements that match. Does anyone want to guess what that one might be?
Query selector all.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Document.query selector all. P.test. Oh, I did it again. P.look. All right, and so you can see this is returning a node list. Now, a node list is like an HTML collection in that it kind of acts like an array. So we're going to have some of the functions that we have available to ourselves in arrays. One that jumps to mind. Let's add this to it. Let's say node list p. Right. We'll say document.query selector all p look. Okay. So if we look at node list p, that's a collection, right? It's a list. Node list p has a length, right? It's telling us there's 2, just like an array or an object. We could do for each, right? Which is that iterator function we learned about, right? So if I can come in here and say for each el, and I could do console.log el, right? So it will loop through each of these things using for each, but it is important to note that it is not an array, right? It's just array-like. It kind of acts like an array. What are some things you can do with arrays that you can't do with node lists? Nothing jumps to mind as an easy example. But if we run type of node list p, you'll see that it's actually an object, right? And if we did type of, an empty array, that's an object. If we do, let's do var r equals new array, type of r, showing up as object as well. So I guess type of doesn't give us anything extra here, but it's important to note that node lists and HTML collections, sometimes these functions that are returning lists of elements, things that kind of behave like arrays, aren't always arrays, and sometimes you won't have some of that capability available to you. Like array.concat, let's see, does node list have the ability to concat? Right? Yeah. So one of the things we were doing with some of our arrays is we're concating them together, but does it have a join? Some of those functions we were playing with, yeah, no join either, right? And so some of the functions you might rely on because you're like, this is an array of elements. Well, it's an array in the sense that we're going to talk about it like it's a list or a collection of elements, but it's not a real JavaScript array. And sometimes you'll have to go through a couple extra steps to be able to get, if you wanted to join 2 node lists together, you'd probably have to do it manually. Got it? Any questions about this? So that's document.query selector and query selector all. That's going to let us address elements by CSS. There's another one, and this is an important one to write down too. Document.get elements by class name, right? And this one is one of the oldest ones, right? So when CSS was first introduced, this was what I used to have to reach for. We used to not have a .query selector method. So if I wanted to get all the elements that had a class in it, we would use this function. And the problem with this function is that it does not take CSS selectors, right? So, if we were typing .look, right, that's all of our paragraphs, this is going to return back an empty HTML collection, right? It's got 0, even though we know we have a class there. It's because this predates that type of selector syntax, and so you're just going to put in the actual class name without any dots or without any special information. Similarly to like document.getElementById, right? We don't put in the hashtag. We don't say, test. We say, document.getElementById, right? We don't say this. We say just by the ID, like no extra pounds or dots or anything, right? It's the same with get elements by class name. And you'll notice this one returns an HTML collection, which kind of behaves like an array, but also does not, in that you don't have concat and you don't have join. Okay? Any questions about that? Those are the main functions. What else do we do under document? Document.title, right? This is the one we were looking at last week, which is talking about the title that goes in the title bar, right? So this, when you're inside the document object, underneath the window object, document is pretty much everything from the start of your HTML tag on down. So you do get some of that meta information. So document.title, and we could change that with document.title equals, neat JS trick, right? So sometimes you might want to use JavaScript to change the title of the page. If you were building a poker app and it might, maybe it wants to tell us when it's our turn to make a move, we might come in here and say document.title equals your turn, right? And then you might write this in a loop so that it flashes. You might have it toggle on between your turn and your turn so that it's like this, right? So that like exclamation points or something are added to this, right? So it really calls attention that something is happening on this tab, okay? What else can we do inside of document? Oh, it's going to show us the page. Let's see. Another element that you're going to have in document is document.body, and this is really where you're going to. It's exactly a reference to your body tag of your HTML element. So, in the olden days, before we had get_element by ID and get_element by class name, before query selector, we would come through here and say like document.body.h1 or inner HTML, right? So document.whatever would give us access to the entire structure of the page for us to do stuff with it. Okay. What else? Any questions on any of this before we start looking at like individual element things that we're going to do? No? All right. How many elements does query selector return, Andrew?
Just one, just the first one.
Okay. And Estrella, what is it? What do we get back if it does not find that element?
No.
No, that's right. So you remember when we were learning about conditionals and stuff, and we were saying like if some of these array objects will be like it'll return -1 if it's false. This is one of those ones that returns null if it's false. So you gotta just kind of juggle all these things. And when in doubt, using the tools that we've learned, like the JavaScript console, you can always test these things and see what happens, right? I don't expect you to remember that index of returns -1 and document query selector returns null. You can always just test it and see what the value is. Okay. We talked about node list. Oh, there is an array from method, right? This one's really useful. So we were talking about all the ones, all the things that are different between node list and HTML collections, right? So what was our one? Var els equals document dot get element. Let's query selector all p dot test. Right, so it's going to give us a node. Did it again. P dot look. So if we look at els now, we know it's a node list, right? We can do array dot from els, and it's going to turn this into an actual array. So now we have an actual array. Well, let's var rls equals, right? So rls is an array, and it's going to have all those functions that we were talking about. This didn't have, right? So we could do rls dot concat, right, and combine it with another array. So array dot from is a useful function that will let us do array things to things that are not arrays. HTML collections, node lists. So it's important to just write that down. And when we say, hey, join these two collections of elements, right? This is the easy way to turn it into an array so that you can use some of those functions. Got it? Here we covered the structure. Document.all, I'm going to spend very little time talking about this because it's deprecated. Right? So document.all is an HTML collection that is going to show all of the elements that exist in the page from top to bottom. Right? So this used to be how we wrote JavaScript before we had all these selectors and all this information. So document.all has every tag that can exist on this page. And you could be like, document.all 11 is our paragraph tag. You might go here and say, we want to change the inner HTML. Let's do that real quick. Right? So document.all 11.style.background equals blue, right? So we used to have to reference each individual element inside a big HTML collection like this. Document.all was the way. Now, this is deprecated, which means that it's no longer supported, and at some point in the future, it's going to disappear from the language. So be aware that you might come across some code that has this. And if you see this, it should be a warning sign that you probably need to update this code. Okay? But it's an interesting way to look at the page and see what it's doing. Okay? Document.body, we covered all that. Yep. Cool. All right, let's look at individual element options, right? So these are things you're going to do on specific elements that have come back to you either through document.getElementById or document.getElements by class name. Anything that returns an element, and an element in our case is like let's see, what would we call it? Els, right? If you look at els1, right, that's a paragraph. If we run type of on this, it's going to tell you that it's an object. But this is an element, and you can tell because it's got information about it. So the els object right, has a whole bunch of things that we can do to it, right? So we can, if we press dot here in our console, we can see all of the options that are available to us. This is really the power and excellence of JavaScript that is going to carry us through every operation we do going forward, aside from like writing loops, okay? So anytime we want to change something about an object, right? We've got else1, that's our second paragraph. You can tell because it's highlighted. If I go else1, some of the things that we can do here, if we had, here, let's add some extra steps so we can play with it. So this second paragraph, let's say it's got an unordered list in here, right? UL, and we'll say li first value. Right? We'll just make a couple. Second, third. Okay. So sometimes when we're working with JavaScript, we might. Nope, I have to redefine it. Okay. So else0 or else1, right? That's our second paragraph. What we'll often do is we'll get else.children, which will be a list of any elements that exist underneath it. Do we have any? You page those. Did I write my code incorrectly? Oh, ULs can't be inside of that. All right. Let's make this a div so it's easier to play with. Div. All right. This is a div. Let's just say dot look so that both of them have that style. Okay. All right. So we've got a div here that has children elements inside of it. So we could do, if we grab our things and we say everything that's got a dot look, else1, right, has children elements, right? And so we can access else1.children to get a HTML collection, which is like an array type of thing that has all of the elements underneath it, right? So we can see that it has one element underneath it, which is our unordered list, and then that one element underneath it, right? So we can continue to walk our way down that chain. If I can close this nonsense. All right, so I can do else1.children, right? It's kind of like an array, so we can access it with 0, which is that UL, and then I can call the children of that, right? So children.children.children all the way down, up and down a chain that way. So the children of EL1, which is our div here, has a UL, that's the first child element, and then it has children, which has 3 elements, right? And so I can look at children 0, which is our very first. Yep, you can see how it highlighted this in blue when I've got it up here. So if I do children, anything I want to do to any element, I can do up and down this chain, right? So if I call children here, what do you think it's going to give me? It's going to tell me. It's going to tell the secret. If I type children here, what do you think is going to happen? Estrella, what do you think is going to pop out of this?
It's gonna say either undefined or like null.
Okay, good
But there's
guess.
nothing there.
All right, that's an excellent guess. But it's going to do something surprising. Oh, if I type correctly without a spec, it's going to give us an empty HTML collection, right? So it's going to give us every one of these like dot children and stuff. You remember we've been learning about like some of these are going to return null, some of them are going to return -1. When we're accessing things that could have things under them inside of the context of the DOM, it's always going to return an HTML collection. It's just that sometimes the collection will be empty, right? So because HTML knows, or the browser, especially in the DOM, knows that it could have any number of elements in it, right? It knows that it can have another paragraph, it could have a div, it can have a span. And so just because it doesn't currently have something in it doesn't mean that it's not going to be prepared to have something in it. And so it's always going to return an HTML collection that has maybe a length of 0, right? So this would be one quick way to be like, are there any other elements inside of here, right? And the same would be true if we went to the other li, right? And we can come in here and do any of those special, 0.children. So we can come in here and say style.background color equals pink, right? And now we've made that element pink. Yeah. There's another method of this, right? It's the same kind of thing, children, right? That gives us this HTML collection, but we could have just as easily said child nodes, which is going to give us everything that exists beneath this. And the thing that we haven't really discussed up until now is where does this text come from? The text is coming from a special type of node that's really treated as like a text node, right? So it's going to say the first thing is text, and then it's got an li, and then it has text. And so when we're updating the content of the page, you should know that everything that is in between the tags counts as text content. Okay, so that is a secret node behind the scenes. So when we're working our way down here, we have two specific methods to deal with the children of a parent, which is child nodes, which is going to give us everything, including text, and children, which is just going to give us the elements. Okay, so like let's play with child nodes, for example, right? Child nodes is a node list, and you'll notice child nodes is a node list, children is an HTML collection. Both of those are the special kind of not quite arrays that we've been experimenting with. If I wanted to turn one of these into an array, what would I use, Leah? If I said, hey, I've got this child nodes list and I want to make this an array so I can combine it with something else, how would I do that?
Like, you could make like a loop and like push each one through there, but I don't think there's probably a better way than that.
There is. We just learned it a few minutes ago. I was just trying to see if anyone remember the version that we just learned. Andrew.
Array.from.
Yeah, that's it. Array.from, and then we just put in els.whatever.child nodes. This will turn any of those weird things into an array. Var a equals, right? So a is now just an array. You can see that it does not have node list in front of it or child whatever's. Okay, so we're here playing with these child nodes, right? So the first node is a text. So let's look at what this one says, right? And if we pull this up, we can see this first text is behind the scenes. Look at this. What is this /n tag? Do you remember? What does this mean to us?
Is it a new line?
New line, right? And then it's /t/t/t. Do you remember what that one is, Leah?
Yeah, tab.
Yeah, that's right. Where do you think this is coming from? The answer will surprise you. This is the data of that first node in that unordered list when we looked at all the child nodes. Any guesses to where this new line tab came from?
So that was made by like HTML itself or something?
What do you mean by that?
Or like you didn't put that in there, like?
Oh, I did put this in there. How do you think it got there? I'll give you a hint. New line, tab.
Oh.
So the very first text node is this white space that you don't even see. The second text node in children, right? If we go to child nodes, what would the next text node be? What would the number be if I wanted to access that? So it goes text li text. What's the next text node? Any ideas? If I wanted to get to this one, this one right here, how would I get to that?
What would it be 2?
Let's try it. Yep. 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Right? It's just like an array, even though it's not really an array. It still uses those type of indexes, right? So what do you think this one has in it? What is the value of this text node in the data attribute?
Is it first value?
Let's see. Where do you think this new line tab came from? It was a really good guess. What it's doing is that it's saying the UL has these child nodes, so it's only talking about the stuff that's at the top level. So it's this one is the first one. This is the second one. Oh gosh, that's the second child node. The third child node is that new line tab. The fourth one is this. The fifth one is this. The sixth one is this, and then the seventh and final one is that. All right, so those are the children of the UL. If we wanted to get to UL, this first value in here, we would have to look at the children of that LI, right? or the child nodes of that li. So we can see that here, right? So we're child nodes, right? If we go to 1, that's our li. Then we could do child nodes, and that just has a single element, which is a text element, and that has the data first value, right? So there's a whole bunch of magic that's happening behind the scenes. Behind the scenes when we were talking about how HTML doesn't care about all this white space and it's ignoring it and it's skipping over it. It's doing it because it knows this is a text node that has no printable content in it. But when there is printable content, if there's data in here that will display, it's showing it, right? But it's important to note that the browser knows that all that content is there and that it's treating it as a node that you can do stuff with, in theory, right? So let's see if this will work. I've never tried this. Let's experiment. So we know that our first, if we go to 0, right? Child node 0 is a text element. If we did like text.data, right? Let's change this to like interesting. Right? I don't know if this is writable. Yeah. So we've just added text to what was before just extra white space characters that we had in our source code, right? So it's really interesting. Most of the time, though, you're not going to use child nodes like this. But what you will use pretty often is .children, right? We most of the time just want the elements. We don't want all this extra text node stuff. But the problem with children is that if you cared about paragraphs of text inside of a text editor or something like that, you need to be able to get to that text content, because we can do children, which is the ul.children. We need to go 0, right? 0.children, right? 0. Right. So this is our li. We might want to go text content to get the information. All right, it is 6 o'clock. We've kind of been chugging away at some pretty meaty and brainy things. Let's maybe take a quick break, come back at like 6:15, and we'll dive into some more things we can do with elements, because this is really important. Okay? Any questions before we go? Y'all good? All right. See you at 6:15. All right. So we've been playing with children. Lets you get access to the children. Can you think of what would give us access to the element above it? Right. So if we're in ELs 1 dot children, right, that's our UL. If we wanted to go to the LI 0 children, right, if we're in the middle element here, what if we needed to get access to the element right above this, the parent element? What do you think we would try here?
Dot parent?
Yeah, let's try it. Dot parent. Right? In this case, it's dot parent element. Okay, so it's always going to be one element. Children is all of the children that could exist, and then there's always going to be one single parent, right? You can't have two parents, so it has the name parent element. But we can also do dot children, right, which is going to get us our elements here. And so we can do 1, right, and we can do dot parent element again, right, which gets us your UL. We can go up and down any direction we want with a combination of children and parent element, okay? And we can go all the way up the chain here as well, right? We can do a dot parent element, which is going to give us our div. And what is our parent element for the div going to be? If we look at our HTML source code here, what is the parent element of the div?
The body.
Yeah. Parent element. Yeah, it's the body. And what is the parent element of the body?
Document.
Close. That is the parent object of the body, but the parent element is HTML tag. And what is the parent element of the HTML tag? It should be nothing, right? Yeah, null. So if you go up, eventually you're going to reach null. And if you go down, right, if we go children dot children, right, we were looking at this before, we're eventually going to get an empty HTML collection. Okay? So using a combination of children and parent element, you can theoretically walk all the way up and down down the tree, right? So we can see this in JavaScript. If we come in here and we say, let's give our body an ID, let's say body element, right? We could do something like this. For body L equals document dot get element by ID. Body. What do we call it? Body element. Yeah. Body element. All right. So that's going to be our body element. We can do while body L, or we could do let's write a function to do this, right? So we could do function. Let's do this. We could do var children equals body L dot children. Okay, that's going to give us that HTML list. Then we can do while children dot length. Right. So while there's length in here, we can say console dot log children dot children. Right. So it's always going to display that list of elements that is there, and then we can say children equals children dot children. Right. So this is a really good, interesting use of the while loop to say while whatever the value of children is, right? Because we set it up here and we say body L dot children. So that's going to give us all of our top level tags. And then it says while, let's say we can make this children dot length, right? So while children has elements inside of itself, we're going to log it out. Let's log it out. And then we're going to say children equals children dot children. Right, so this is going to loop through everything, giving us an array for each, like, so this is going to be for the top level, right? It's only going to really do one thing. What does it say? Length of undefined, line 34. Oh, okay. So why would children dot, children dot length. This should, yeah, it's going to give us, eventually it's going to get an error because it has nothing. So let's see, document dot get element by ID body element, right? Dot children, and then we echoed it, but then we would have to pick one of those nodes. So that's what we should do, right? So we can go children dot children 0, right? And that's going to do the same thing. But in theory, we could write some kind of function that will let us recurse our way down this tree, and the same with all the way going up, right? We could while there's something in here, we can continue to operate on it. I don't know why this one's not working. We could debug it if we wanted, but I don't want to take the time. Cool. What else can you do? All right, so in here, right, so we've got document.body element.children, right? We can also do, right? So that's our body. We can also do .firstChild, right? Which is going to give us that text node, right? So this is going to be an example of one of those nodes that has new line tab, okay? We could also do first element child, right? So when we were talking about child nodes, that's going to include all these little text nodes that are doing extra stuff for us. But if we wanted to get the first element that was in here, we could do first element, right? First, yeah, and then each one of these down that list would give us that. So we could try writing our little loop here, like let's just do first element child, right? So while child dot children, or we could do if child dot children, right? So we can say if it has child nodes, if child dot children, right? Then we can loop through it. So this could be inside of our if block. Okay. So if we wanted to get the first child, we would use this. What if we wanted to get the last child? What do you think that would be?
Last element child.
Yeah, let's try it. Okay. So element, last element child. Okay. It's going to give us that JavaScript that is being inserted by our little plugin here that's doing live reloads. But in general, this would be, if we did it on our UL, right? What was that in? Where do we have it? Okay. If we did this, I have to define ELs again. So we reloaded the page. Man, how far away did we define this? We're playing in the console too much. right? So we could do ELs, which was our paragraph tag and our look tag, and we could do ELs dot last child, element child. Oh, you have to get it on an element, right? So let's go to our div. Yeah, so that's going to give us the last elements in there. We could do that with here as well, last element child. That's going to give us our third EL, right? So we could get always the last tag that's available in that operation. And then you can also see a count, right? So this is going to be, when we're doing things like, here, let's get this one, right? So this isn't, this is a type of node, right? So this one, if we do length, right, it's going to give us undefined. But if we need to know how many elements were in here, we could do child element count, which is going to give us the number 3, right? So it's important to note that even though HTML is aware of the fact that this is a tag that has children, right? If we did ask about child.children, right? That's going to give us HTML collection 3. We could do length on this, which is going to give us 3, or we could do child element count, which is going to tell us the same thing, right? Just one level up. So if we've got the element, the UL, we can say how many elements exist in here, and we can do it either this way or by saying give me the children, which is going to be an HTML collection, and we're gonna say what's the length of that, right? So there's a couple ways to skin a cat here in this instance, and they're both equally valid. Okay. What else can you do on elements? We looked at parent node, parent elements. There's also siblings, right? So if we're inside, right? So sibling is like children, but it's like your brothers and sisters, right? So if we were inside of our ELs 1 dot children, right? Come on. Dot children, right? This is our list. Children 0 dot children. This is our list of elements, right? If we got the first node or the first element, child, right? Oh, children 0. Let's get that one. All right. So we've got that. That's the very first element that's here, right? It's this top first value one. We can get that one's, next sibling, which is the text that was behind the scenes, but we can get next element sibling, which is going to give us the second LI in that list. And then that one also has next element sibling, okay, which is that third one. All right, so there's a whole bunch of ways. Every single element that exists in your HTML is going to have parent, children, child node, next parent, next sibling, and sometimes, like if we do it on this one, we call next element sibling, right? This is going to return null, so we can check for this in our if statements and conditionals, right? We'd say like, if we wanted to loop through every single element in here, we could just keep calling next sibling until we get a null. Okay? There's a whole bunch of different ways to get there, which is, you'll notice this is a complicated way to also write with CSS something like, div.body, or div.look, ul, li, last child. Right? This is a selector. We learned about this in CSS. So we could take this exact selector and do document.getElement by, or we could do a query selector, right? Query selector, and paste that in there, and it's going to give us that same li. So this is just a bunch of different ways. It's really, think of it as like addresses, right? So, your address is a street address, but there's also another way you could describe this. It would be like, take the first left, then take your second right, and then turn at the stop sign, right? These are all different ways to get to that element. And we can do that in JavaScript, we can do it in CSS, or we could do it literally, and this is what I'm going to highly recommend that we do, is that anything we want to work with in JavaScript, the best way to get access to it is throw an ID on the element you want to touch. Okay? If you're going to be doing stuff over and over and over again in JavaScript, the quickest way and the safest way to get access to an element is to reference it by ID. This is like the difference between me saying, who knows the answer to this question, rather than saying, Andrew, can you answer this question? I'm referencing a specific entity rather than saying, like, can I talk to the person that's sitting to the right of Leah above Gregory, right? They're on my screen, like Andrew is above Gregory and to the right of Leah. I'm talking about the same person, but how we get there and how we address and reference that individual is going to be, there's a bunch of different ways to get there, but it's important that you're aware that those ways do exist because you're going to need to see them occasionally, right? One of the ways that you're probably going to work with children and with next sibling and first sibling and all those different like name specific ones is when we start talking about attaching things with events, right? So if we were going to add, if we were creating a bunch of, like this is a to-do list, and every time we type some words in, hit enter, it adds another element in here. You might not know, these elements might not have an ID, but you need to be able to be like, the last child is always the one we just added. So you're always going to be able to reference it by, if this was our ID equals to-do list, right? If I do document.getElement by ID, the last child element is always going to be whatever's last on this list. The first child element is always going to be what's first on this list. So the ways that you're going to interact with this, you're occasionally going to want to be able to reference these things not by ID. You're just going to care about the position. Okay? Any questions about that? Referencing elements is very, very important, and you need to be aware of the ways to do it. So of the ways we discussed, let's just do a quick review. How would I get an element, a single element, by a CSS selector?
Query selector.
Yep, that's going to give us one element. Which one is going to give us, the first or the last or the middle, or is it random?
The first one.
It's always going to give us the first. So if you got two things that are class look, we're only ever going to get this paragraph. If I wanted to get multiple elements by the class name, what would I use? There's two ways, so I'll accept either answer.
Query selector it was like class element class list or something.
Close. Yeah, you're very close. It was another document dot get elements by class name.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, we can come in here and say, let's take this out. All this silly code we're playing with. Yep. So we could come in here and say document dot get elements by class name dot look, or look, right? Because we don't put the dot in there. It's going to give us an HTML collection. If I wanted to get all the children of an element, what would I? It's in the name, right? Dot children. Okay. What if I wanted to get the ones? If I'm in this second value, this is an li. What if I wanted to get the one, the parent node? How would I get that? That's in the name too, parent, right? So, a lot of these names are like going to be really easy for you to remember. Like if you want to go up, who's your mom and dad? And you can, who's their mom and dad, all the way up to the top. When you want to go down, it's children, all the way down the line. Right? Think of it like a tree, and then siblings are the ones to the left and right of it. Okay. Good. We'll skip over create element for now. There's some other elements that we're going to look at, right? So if we've got ourselves here, let's grab the let's grab our H1. What do we call it? Var L equals document dot get element by ID test. Right. So that is our H1 element. This one up top. So L has a bunch of specific methods to it, right? So we know how to find our way up and down the chain if we wanted to use the document object model way to get there. But we can also do set attribute. And what set attribute is going to do is you're going to put in an attribute. So we can put in like class, and then we can put in, look. Right? So if we inspect our element now, you'll notice that it got a red border because we've attached the attribute class to this information. Now it's important to note that we can add any kind of attribute we want here. We can put in like L set attribute fake attribute. We can say Eric, right? And if we inspect this element, right, it has added an attribute into HTML that HTML doesn't know anything about, right? We can add as many attributes as we want. JavaScript doesn't care. The browser doesn't care. It doesn't know what to do with fake attribute, but we've added it. And we can also get that value with el.getAttribute, fake attribute, right? It's going to return that value over and over again. We can even put in fake attributes in here, right? This is like not going to be valid HTML, but we can come in here and say body. We can say interesting attribute equals Andrew, right? We can put Andrew in here. And so if we reload our page now, we can see that there is an interesting attribute equals Andrew. We know that HTML doesn't know what this attribute is. We just made this up, but we can get it with JavaScript. So we can see document.getElement by ID test .get attribute interesting attribute, right? Which is going to return the word Andrew, right? So there's going to be a lot of JavaScript frameworks. React is one of them. There's a couple other ones you might get exposed to that are going to use fake attributes like this to store information for telling the JavaScript library what to do. Oftentimes, just by convention, these will be prefixed with like the word data. So it'll be like data URL equals, and it'll be like index.js, right? So the JavaScript library is going to look at every element on the page and say like, give me the data URL attribute and do something with it, right? Even though it means nothing to the JavaScript, they're going to use this to store information for some widgets where you've got like drop-down menus. It'll be like animation style, right? It'll be like data like animation style, and it'll be like drop-down, right? It means nothing in the context of the browser, but your JavaScript is going to be able to read that attribute from the HTML, and then if you're writing a JavaScript library that does something, it will say use the drop-down type, right? So that's an interesting method that you'll see pretty often. What else will you do with elements? Is set attribute, get attribute. You can also remove an attribute, right? So if we had, let's just add that document dot get element by class name, get element by ID test, right? And we add an attribute. So let's do set attribute class, or let's say student, and we'll say it equals Leah, right? So now our HTML element has that element, right? It has a student equals Leah. We can remove it with remove attribute document by ID test dot remove attribute student, right? And so now we can see if we look at our HTML, it is gone. Okay. So one thing to note is that especially when you're working with classes, right? So if you wanted to go in and add a class to test, we did this before. Document dot get element by ID test dot class name, right, equals test. All right, so we've just added a single class name in here, right? If we wanted to add additional classes into here, right? If I say, look, right? That's our one that has the border, right, and the padding. These have to be separated with spaces because the class name is an attribute. If you remember from your HTML, is that expecting, like any number of classes that we put in here is going to be separated with spaces. So if I did look, test, fun, whatever, right? Those are all classes that exist on here. So when you're working with this in JavaScript, if you just say equals, it's going to replace everything that was inside that parameter, inside that class, with just the single one, right? So you always, you probably want to do equals and then class name plus space and then the one you want to add, right? So you're adding that string. Okay? So now the class name value, the attribute for class name has test and look. Okay, got it? You can also, one of the weird ones, right? Document.get element by ID test, right? It has a .id value, which is going to equal test. So if I change this to something else, right? Now this is an ID of something else. So if I ran that same code again, right? Nothing is going to happen because it cannot find document.get element by ID test, right? So ID is going to be unique, but you can change the ID with the .id attribute or property of this element, okay? Any questions about this? Class name is an interesting, right? ID is an attribute of that element, right? So we can access the ID this way. Let me reload. Right? So we can access the ID this way, but we can also access it with get attribute ID, right? Which is going to tell us the same thing. And then we can also do set attribute ID not test. Right. Yes?
The .id, is that just for IDs, or could you do like .class or like anything that you want?
So yeah, ID is one that is definitely a top level dot. Class is not .class, it is .class name. Right? But there's a perfect example. This element doesn't have a class yet. I deleted my .test, right? So class name, this was, when we reload our page, these are the classes that we put in here. It's not .class, it's .class name. I don't know why it's different. ID and class name definitely work, even though class name is not what the name of the attribute is. But then the same is also true in that you can reference it specifically with the set attribute and get attribute methods by its actual name, right? So class, if I come in here and I say set attribute, look, test, fun, right? Now the class name is going to have look, test, fun. So you can use either direction. The data attribute is another one that is also special, though that's kind of new. So when we were talking about like some of these JavaScript libraries will use a data dash whatever, there is a document, test, ID, test, .data is its own type of object. So anything you put in there with like data, right? So if we go data name equals Eric, data age equals 37, right? The data one is interesting in that it gives us a name. Oh, how do we do it? Data. I don't use this very often. Let's look it up. HTML, JavaScript, data attribute. There's a special syntax for this, data attributes. Yeah, so you use data dash whatever in the HTML. Data set. Yeah, excuse me, data set. That's it. So when we're in here, we can do data set dot name, right, and then data set dot age. All right, so that's another special one. Any attribute you put in here with data dash as the prefix, you're going to have a special object called data set. And the whole reason that we did this is in HTML is that it's really easy for us to add extra information about HTML elements that we might want to use in our products when we're developing JavaScript. So the data set object gives us an actual object that we can do stuff with, just like our other objects, right? So we could do for var name in document.get element by ID test dot data set, right? So we're just looping through each of those, and we could do console.log name plus equals plus document get element by ID dot data set name, right? So this lets us have the ability to like write stuff in HTML that we can then loop through in where did I have var name? Oh, let's give it data name right here. I should have made this easier on ourselves. Var data equals document get element by ID test dot data set. And so data now has that. And we can come we should be able to like loop through this for var I in data. Right? Console.log data I. Yeah. So we're able to access that way. Got it? I don't know if there's any others. Those are the only ones I've ever used is .id, .classname, and .dataset. However, you will frequently use .get attribute and set attribute pretty frequently. There's another good one, right? Oh, there is. Yeah, the third one, right? It's document .get element by ID test, right? .style, right? This is going to be the style attribute. And this is going to be how we're going to interact with special CSS properties. So you remember in CSS, we're going to go in there and we would have previously defined style equals background color red, right? So now it's going to be red behind the scenes. This special attribute is directly linked to it. So we could do get attribute style, right? It's going to tell us our CSS that we have in there, but we can also come in here and set attribute style, and we can say background color blue, right? Or we can operate it on as that special type of object, right? We can say style, and then you'll notice this says background dash color. That's the formal CSS way to describe this. But when we're doing it in JavaScript in this special object, we use camel case. So we'd say background color with no dash, but now the C is uppercase. And we can say background color equals red, right? And so back in the day before we had CSS animation, remember the other day we were playing with moving things, rotating them around. We would do stuff like this. Let's make this, let's give it a, okay, it's red. Let's say width is 50 px. Let's say top 0 position relative, right? Okay, so we've got this red box in here. We would write a loop that was like for var I equals 0. I is less than or equal to 1,000. I plus plus. Okay, and then we would do document.get element by ID test dot style dot left equals I plus px, right? And maybe we want to actually, because we want it to go really fast, we'll do I equals I plus 10, right? So it's going to move from 0 to 1,000 in steps of 10. And then we put that there. Oh, it went really fast. So let's make it slower. Let's reload. Let's make this I plus plus. Oh, click save. All right, so we would do stuff like that. It's going too fast because my computer's too amazing. But we would animate things this way, where we would have this happen every half a second or something. We would intentionally be modifying the style attribute of an element and having it just chug along, tick, 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 on through the page, right? And we could debug this with our debugger as well to see it, step through. So that used to be the way we would animate things when we wanted to expand or scroll. We would change CSS properties over a set period of time, right? So we could. Here's an example of how to do this, right? So we could do set timeout, which we'll learn about next. We'll say document dot get element by ID test dot style dot left equals, let's copy it to itself, right? Plus 10. And we might want to stop this. If I'll just show it off real quick because it's too much trouble than it's worth. And we'll say that we'll do this every like 100 milliseconds, right? Right. Plus 10 px. Yeah. Anyway, so that would be how we would animate something the old painful way, right? Kind of follow along. And we could have it loop through colors and anything we could change with CSS, we could change with JavaScript by operating on the properties of those style elements. Okay? All right. Has attribute. Has attribute is a way for you to check if an element has an attribute, right? So we could, if for whatever reason you're writing a library and you wanted to operate on every element that has a specific element, you could use the has element thing. So let's look at document.get element by ID test. And we can do has element or has attribute class. That's going to tell you true. But if we say has attribute Andrew, which it no longer has, it'll say false. So if you wanted to just quickly check and see if it had something, this would be one way you could do it. All right. Those are the attributes. Let's skip over the create node stuff, the creating elements right now, because it gets kind of complicated and we skipped over the previous one. Let's talk about how we've been operating on the content of elements and spend a little bit of time on that, right? And then we'll come back to that after break. So if we go to document.getElementById test, right? That's our H1 element. It has a few things, right? We've been up until now working with inner HTML pretty often, right? So inner HTML, if you look at it, it says test. If we set it to anything, we can say test, right? We can add as many words as we want in here. We've been doing this pretty frequently. The other one that we took a look at the other day is inner text, right? Or text content, right? It's going to tell us the same information, except text content lets us put in HTML in a way that will display it, right? So if I put in here and I say, strong hello, right? So that's valid HTML. Let's take out this nonsense so we can see it, right? If I change this, we can see the HTML tags in here, okay? But if I was inside of, if I was using inner HTML, right? That is actually, the HTML that we put in this string is going to be rendered. So that's one of the ways that we could, we've got our UL element down here, right? Which is like right here, div class look UL, we gave it to-do list, right? So if we wanted to add a whole bunch of HTML to this page and we wanted to like change this list, right? We could do document.get element by ID to-do list, which is the name of our UL, and we could do inner HTML equals li new item 1, li new item 2, right? And so with JavaScript, we can control, as soon as I hit enter, the entirety of the HTML that was between the UL tag and the end UL tag has been replaced with this, right? Whereas before it had remember all those text nodes, right? We were looking at, let's look at that now, right? Remember when we were seeing all those crazy text nodes that was in child nodes? All of those are gone now because it no longer has that tab character and the new line, or the new line and the tab, because the entirety of that HTML has been replaced with this. Whereas before, if we reload this page, and I press up here real quick, we've got all these text nodes. That's what the actual HTML source is currently when the page is loaded. But as soon as I replace this with this, now the HTML has been changed, and now all it has is just those two child nodes. Okay? Same with children. There is, we also can control the outer HTML, right? So that's, I don't know where you would ever possibly want to do this because most of the time you're going to be operating inside of a specific node. But an example of this, right? So we have document.get element by ID to-do list, right? The outer HTML of this is going to include the tag itself, right? So if we wanted to remove this completely, right? So this is where it gets kind of dangerous, right? If I say, it equals nothing, that UL is completely gone now. And the problem is I can no longer reference it. Get document.get element by ID to-do list, right? That's going to return null because that element has been removed. I've just replaced that element with this, right? But so if you're going to use outer HTML for any reason, right? The outer HTML includes the entire element. Oh, this is a perfect representation. It's showing you those little new line tabs and things that are in our source code. But if you're going to do the outer HTML, if you want to, make sure that you leave the elements definition so that you can access it, right? So you'd have to put in like to-do list /UL so that you can still reference it and be able to access that element, right? If you were working on a list, like a shopping list or a to-do list or anything like that, right? If you want to use outer HTML, it's great, but make sure you don't delete the reference that you were getting to in the first place. Though one of the ways you might do this is that you might be working with one of the children, right? So like children 1, right? That's one of our LIs. You might do .outer HTML and be able to see the full entirety of the LI instead of the inner HTML, which is just going to show you the text node. Any questions there? We've kind of sliced and diced HTML from a bunch of different angles. You can. This is all. Do you remember what this kind of traversal is called here? It had a 3-letter acronym.
Document object model.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and you're going to hear this referred to as document object model or the DOM. So oftentimes they'll be like, what is in the DOM right now? Okay. We learned about style. Special elements to be aware of, right? The other one, to answer Leah's other question, one of the things that you will often access is if there's an input, right? Input name equals whatever, ID equals some input value equals Eric, right? We've been learning about form inputs here. If we were doing document dot get element by ID some input. The other attribute you might access just with the dot notation would be value, which is going to give us whatever the value is. But you could, because value is an attribute as well, you could also access it document.get element by ID. Now let's just press up. Get attribute value, right, which is going to return the same information. So there's a couple different ways to go about this. I personally think like one of the safer ways to get attributes like this is using get attribute, because if you get an attribute that doesn't exist, right, it's going to give you something null. Whereas if you try to access the dot notation of something that doesn't exist, it's going to give you an error, right? So check this out. What was our test? Right? Test.value. It's going to give you undefined. So be aware that there are a couple different ways to access this. Some are better than others. But if you do, let's do get attribute value. Okay. Null is better. Undefined might make more sense. Null make more sense. It just depends on how you want to check against, like seeing if something is there, right? Because we could check. Let's take a value out of here, right? So we've got our sum input. Right, this is our input. If we do dot value, we're getting an empty string. If we do get attribute value, should be an empty string as well. So the ones that we care about accessing, it's going to return very similar types of information to you, but just be aware that there are some differences, right? If you call an attribute that hasn't been set at all, you might get undefined, you might get null, depending on which way you access it. Okay. All of that is to say that we've learned how to like walk up and down nodes as if it was a tree. In general, I almost always am going to, for the elements I care about, and you can even see it in these examples, I'm always in here typing document.getElement by ID, right? If it's an ID I'm trying to get access to, I'm going to put an ID on it. It's important to me. And it, to me, functionally, when we're looking at writing our HTML documents and building a structure for other people to work in, putting an ID on something is a really easy way to say, like, hey, future developer on my team, this element is important to us, and we're going to do stuff with it. If I've got a class in here, to me, classes mean like I'm going to style this some way, but an ID means I'm going to do something here with JavaScript. So I very rarely would say like, give me the H1 test next sibling, which is this A element, because one of the things that we can't count on in JavaScript is that the next sibling in here is always going to be this element, right? Because if I was writing code in here and I said test, right, dot next sibling, next element sibling, right? That's that. But if somebody comes in after the scenes and is like, I'm going to add a cool new menu, right? Nav, right? And they put in a nav element up here, right? Oh, come on. I'm typing so poorly today, right? This is now going to give us a different return than if I actually cared about that anchor tag for whatever reason. Getting it by ID is always going to return that element. Okay? So that to me is stylistically the big difference. You might want to write code that is going to walk up and down a tree like this, but it's dangerous because you might not be the only person working on the HTML. And if you've written code that relies on this, like Leah, when you're working on this card game, if you're doling out cards left and right, yeah, you could absolutely get the next card in the deck or the next card in your hand by saying next sibling. But if Andrew comes in later on and styles it in a different way and maybe adds a nice border or something, your next sibling might not be a card anymore, which would break some of your logic. So choosing the right way to get through things, for me, in JavaScript, you can never get better than putting an ID on something and getting it by ID. Any questions there? That's really about DOM traversal and how to walk up and down. We're going to continue to explore all these. There are great reasons and uses of child nodes, and we will use them as we go through the class, but they're specific to certain scenarios. So cool. All right, it is 7 o'clock. We're going to take a 15-ish minute break. When we come back, we're going to learn how to create elements and add them to the page, all through JavaScript. Cool. See you at 7:15. Recording started. All right, so we're going to look at, over the next hour or so, using JavaScript to create elements. And to do this, we're going to take a look at a couple different functions. The first of which is document.createElement. So if we're looking at here, and let's take this over here. If we're on our page where we're at, right, we have this list of elements, right? We can at any time type in, a var, and we'll say var new element equals document.createElement, and we'll say li, right? So whatever type of tag you want to create, you're going to put that as the argument of create element. Okay, now by doing this by default, you'll notice nothing on this page has changed. This is all kind of small, but nothing has changed. We've created an element just in JavaScript. So if we look at new element, you'll see that it is an li. It has no information here. But all the things that you can do to an element in JavaScript, you can do to this element that we've just created, right? So you might say new element.id equals, something, right? Something. And if we look at new element now, you'll start to see that the HTML is filling itself in, right? So we can say new element.class name equals neat. And if we look at new element now, we'll see that all this information is in here. Okay, now if we wanted to add content to this element, right, so we wanted this list item to say something, we have two ways to do it. What is one of those ways? And we'll say Astrea. How do I add something to, some text in here? I want this list item to have words in it. I can't hear you.
Dot
okay.
text.
Dot text.
Oh, sorry. It's dot text content.
Yeah, that's one way. So I can do dot text content is Astrea, right? And now our element has Astrea in it. What is another way we can do this? What is another method to add information in between those tags? Go ahead, Andrew.
Is there inner text?
Or inner text, yeah. So that's so we'll give Leah credit for this one. So new element dot inner text equals Leah.
I'm sorry, Andrew.
Yeah.
You're all right. Mine was going to be way longer. It was going to be a new element dot get element by ID dot inner HTML, or could you just do new element inner HTML?
Yeah, we can just do new. So new element is an element, right? We've created.
Oh yeah,
since
you grabbed it already. Okay.
So all of those things that we've been playing with the last hour, like set attribute, get attribute, dot parent, dot children. Like if we ran new element dot parent right now, element, it's going to give us null because it does not exist inside of the HTML anywhere. We just created it in JavaScript. It exists. We can touch it. We can do stuff with it, but it's not on the page, and we haven't added it yet. What is another way to add content to the middle, Andrew? We've looked at inner text. We've looked at text content.
So we couldn't do the new element dot inner HTML.
Yep. Dot inner HTML.
Okay.
Yep. That's one of them. Equals.
Okay.
Andrew, but maybe we'll make Andrew. We want to make that strong. Andrew, right? So you're going to stick out, right? So now, if we look at new element. You can see that it has another element inside of it. So what we've done, we use document.createElement to create an element, but we've used inner HTML to create a second element, right? This is a new element that exists in here. And if we do new element dot children, right? You can see that that element, even though it's not on the page anywhere, still follows the same rules, and we can continue to work with it and manipulate it however we want. Okay. So how would I add this to the list of, let's say I wanted to add this to the bottom of this UL, right? So we know that we have document.getElement by ID to-do list, right? That's our UL, okay? But I've created this element in JavaScript, and then the element's name is new element. We're going to use the append child function. So I can do new element. What that is going to do is it's going to add it to that list. It's going to put it at the very end of the list of children. So if you watch real quickly when I hit enter here, you can see that Andrew in strong has showed up here. So this is one of the most powerful ways in JavaScript that you can control creating new elements and adding them to the page, right? So you can always append child here. Now, the same way that we just went through all those steps to add this list of elements, the other way to do this would be to just go directly to document.getElementById, to-do list, right? .inner HTML, and we could have said document.getElements by ID test .inner HTML plus li another item, right? What did we? Oh, because shoot. Do you see what I did there as a bug? Who can see the bug here and what we typed?
Is it the test?
Yeah. I said the to-do list, which is our unordered list, .inner HTML equals test.innerHTML plus
you
li.
changed-
Yeah. I accidentally just my fingers typing faster than my
So
brain
you
works.
just changed the ID to all that?
Yeah. I changed the content to be whatever that was the information inside that H1. So this is what I should have done. To-do list.innerHTML equals to-do list.innerHTML plus another item. Right? So if I go like this, I can add items all on down the list using that same method, right? But without, so there's two ways to go about this. The formal way, where we create, document.createElement li, right? And then we go through and we set the ID, set the class name, and all that stuff. Or we can literally just modify the HTML of the parent element. Both ways are equally valid. Both ways are perfect. What document.createElement does for you is that you've got an object that you can operate on in JavaScript, whereas let's say we were writing a function in here. Well, let's give ourselves let's say button ID equals some button. We'll just put onClick equals add element, right? And we'll say add new list item, and we'll do button. Okay, and then we need to make sure this is a function. Okay, so we've added a button here to our page, right? There's a button. When we click this, we want it to do something. Obviously, we haven't created this add element thing. Let's go make ourselves a JavaScript. We have a script in here, right? So let's make a function. That is function add element, right? So if we wanted to do a bunch of cool stuff in here with JavaScript, we might say that when we click add element, I'm going to say, let's get a reference to the element. So let's go var to-do list equals document.getElement by ID to-do list, right? And then we'll say var new L equals document.createElement li. Oh, we have an element in here, right? Let's what is this one? Right, we have an input. Let's use this as well, right? So I've got an input here, and so what we'll do is we've got our add element. We're getting a reference to the UL because that's where we're going to put the element. Then we're going to create an element here, okay? And then we're going to say new L dot inner HTML equals document dot get element by ID. What is the name of that element? Some input dot value, right? So we're getting the value of that text box and we're putting it inside this new element that doesn't exist, right? We just created it. It's nowhere on the page. And then all we're going to do is once we've got this value, we're going to come in here and say to-do list dot append child new EL, right? And then we're done. So we're on this page. I can type anything I want in here. I'm going to make this smaller and say Andrew. Oh, we've got an error here somewhere. Append child on node. Parameter 1 is not type node. Okay. To-do list. What? Maybe it's not an to-do list. Okay, let's see if we can debug this here. Does anyone see anything wrong with here real quick before we move on? Get element by ID, to-do list. Create an element. Get element by ID. Oh. It's because I'm appending the string. Duh. So if I come in here and I type in Andrew, it should work. Right, yeah, so now I can add Leah. And so what we might want to do when we've got this working is we say, that's great, but I shouldn't have to clear this out every time. So then maybe we'd come in here and say new or document.get element by ID some input dot value equals none. So now every time I add someone, Andrew, it's going to clear out this box. Leah. Selena. Gregory. Right? So that's one way, right? This is the formal way to do this. Okay? But the other way, if we wanted to just operate on inner HTML, is we'd have to bring extra information into this mechanism, right? So we'd first need to know, we'd probably need to create a variable that's like var names equals, something like this. Because we have to have something to store it. If we wanted to do, right. So let's take this out so that it starts with an empty list. Okay? And we probably want to come in here and say, right. All right, document create element. Then we don't want to, if we wanted to do this with the inner HTML method, let's comment this out. Right. We would have to say, all right, so when the add element button is clicked, we want to get the value. So we'll do document.get element some input dot value. Now, how would I add this to the array? Who wants to tell me how I'm going to add something to the content of the array? So this array, right now it's empty, but it might have 10 names in here. How do I add something in here?
Push.
Yeah, okay. So that's exactly right. So we would do like new names dot push. We're going to put this in new element dot value, right? So we're always going to be, whenever we click this button, we're going to add that to the array. Now, if we wanted to do this with inner HTML instead of creating an element and appending a child, now we've got to maintain a string. So I'd probably have to come in here and say like var list items equals, right? And then I would come in here and I'd have to do a loop. So I'd do for var I equals 0, I is less than names dot length, I plus plus. And then I would do list items equals list items plus li plus names I plus li. Right, so this is going to make a giant string, and if we console.log this at the end of it, right, you're going to see that as we continue to add list items, you'll see that this continues to grow. And then what we're going to do is the same thing, but we don't have to append child because we're just going to update the inner HTML. So we can do document.get element by ID to-do list. Oh, we already added it to a variable, right? So we can just do to-do list dot inner HTML equals list items. Okay, so same idea here, right? It's test 2, and you can see that every time we run this, it's printing back the HTML. So both models are correct, but in one model you've got to be in charge of a whole bunch of strings, and you might have to loop over things. And in the other model, we're just saying, hey, take the elements that are already here and add an element to the end. Now, are there ways to add elements to the top? Can we, let's see. Yeah, I mean, we can also replace children as well. We'll look at that in a second. Let's see. I don't know if you can append child to top of element. Oh, insert before, right? So insert before is even a bigger pain in the butt, right? Because if we were doing it the old way, right? Let's comment this out. Right? If we wanted to have it so that rather than append child, we would have to get the first child from that, right? So we'd have to do to-do list dot first child element child dot insert before, and then we would put in new EL, right? So this is going to add it to the top. And like the big difference here is the to-do list, which is the UL, knows that it has children, and append child just puts another child at the bottom. Insert before happens because it needs to know what element we're inserting before of. So you have to get the first list item first, and then insert before it, right? So if we do this now, come back here and we say, test. Oh, cannot read property insert before of no, right? Oh, dot children. Let's test this out. Let's see. To do var L equals document dot get element by ID to do list. Okay, el dot first element child. Oh, it doesn't have any elements. Yeah, so that's like problem number one. Because we have no elements in this list, first element child has nothing, right? So you'd have to do a whole complicated thing where it's like if let's just add one, and then I'll show you a simple thing. Right? We'd have to like check the length of the children first before we could do this. When in reality, you probably just want to append one thing. But let's just add one here, right? Like li, whatever. Right. So we did this now. Insert before on node. Right. So let's test this in here. Document get element by ID to do list dot first child element child dot insert before. Yeah, and we'd say new document create element li dot inner. Two arguments required, but only one present. Let's look this up. I've never used insert before, so let's do W3 schools. We must be doing something incorrectly here. Oh, come on. Insert before. Okay, pen the text. Oh, yeah, it happens on the parent object, right? So I was kind of right. So we don't do first element child. We still do insert before on the to-do list, but we have to put the child. What this is saying is that the node we're going to do it as is the second argument. So we could come in here and do like to-do list dot children, right, 0. So this should work if we do test. Yeah, test 2. Right. So either way is perfectly fine. If you wanted to add stuff at the top, like this is a way to do it. And then if you wanted to do it by using inner HTML so that you're responsible for the text content of the strings, that's a way to do it too, right? Both methods are correct. If memory serves, and we might have to test this to verify this is still true, is that the inner HTML method was like 10 times faster the last time I checked this, which was like a decade ago. So that might not be true anymore, but like if you think of this as each line of code is doing a bunch of stuff, each line of code that you're doing here, like set attribute ID, set class name, all of those things is a thing that is causing your browser to have to execute something. Whereas inner HTML is just like whatever HTML was there before, replace it with this HTML. And so it used to be the inner HTML method was preferred just because of the speed at which it did the work. It might be not the case anymore. We could check what is faster. Inner HTML versus create element. Okay, so now it's saying that create element is more performant. Okay, yeah, so it looks like that has changed, and it's faster to do this now. And we could test that if we wanted to by building a page and using the console.time and the console.timeend method. We could just go through 2,000 different ways. We could make 2,000 LIs, and we could make 2,000 create elements and just loop through them and just see which one is quicker. All right, so because browsers are constantly evolving and changing, like stuff that used to apply that I remember is like, I'm always need to use inner HTML is no longer the case anymore. And it's important to just stay on top of that. Cool. If you wanted to replace an element with another element, right? So we can, it says replace child old new. We could do the same thing in here. And so if you were going to, swap out an element, we could come in here and say document.get element by ID to-do list dot replace child, and we could say document dot get element by ID to-do list dot children. Right? Let's say we're going to get children 0. We're going to replace it with document dot get element by ID dot children 2. Undefined. Oh, I forgot to put it in my element to-do list. Right. So now we replaced test with the other one. Right. We can run this again. Oh, let's add in value 1, value 2, value 3. And you can see that this is going to take the first one. It's going to replace row 0, which is value 2 or value 3, and replace it with the third one, right? The second index. So it should be value 1 up top. Yeah. So value 3 was replaced with value 1. You see how it swapped those two around? And that's the syntax for that. I don't use that very often. I think there are better ways to do that, but just be aware that it exists. If we wanted to take a look, we were taking a look at class names, right? What's one that has a bunch of classes? Yeah, H1 test, right? So if we go to document.getElement by ID test, and we do class name, right? It's going to give us that string that is a list. But we have another method available to us, which is class list, right? So class list, which is going to give us one of those fake arrays that's not really an array. So it's broken up by string. Okay, so each one is on its own separate element. So you can iterate through each of those things. Like we say document.getElement. Let's just type up test. ID test, right? Class list. Dot length. Right, it's going to tell us there's 4. We can for each through these, for each function, class name, console.log, class name. Right. How can we? Class list is an awesome little thing that gives you an array of all the classes that exist on here, but it's also incredibly easy to get this with the string that we've got. Does anyone remember? How we can split, or how we can explode a string into an array based on any character we want. Like, to me, document.getElement by ID test dot class name. Right? This already has all that we need here to turn this into an array really easily. With one of the functions that we learned that strings have last week.
Splice.
Splice is close. Splice was when we were going to replace parts of a string with other strings.
Split?
Yeah, split. And so by default, I think if we run split, yeah, it doesn't do anything. But if we put in a blank space in there, now we have an actual array, not a DOM token list, whatever type of special object that is not really an array, right? Like that DOM token list, I'd be willing to bet if we run document.getElement by ID test dot class list, right? We know that even though this looks like an array, it does not have join, right? Probably. Yeah, join is not a function. So if we wanted to do any of the function specific things we want to do, like split is a great one, right? Because now I can join this with that, and now I'm back to a string again. Or I can concat this with another array. If I had, concat, and let's just make an array in here. Let's say fun. Or let's do fun. Right. So now I've got 6 elements in here, and then I can join that, right? Join. So I think it's almost always better to operate on the class name attribute, the class name property over class list, because class list is not really an array. It's a special type of object that kind of looks like an array, but it's just so easy to get an array if you know that there's a split function of a string, right? Split is going to give you an array, and then the array has all these extra functions. So as we cover a lot of these topics in JavaScript, I'm going to continue to ask these little questions to you, because there's a million ways to do things, and they're all correct, for whatever your use is. And whatever you end up picking as the first thing you do, just be aware there's usually 2 or 3 different ways to get there. And those ways are also true as well. But it's important that you know that those ways exist, because when you're reading and consuming other people's content, other people's programming, they might have chosen a different way, and you should at least be familiar with what the words are and what the functions are, because when you're working on someone else's code, it's best to just follow whatever they're doing, do exactly the same thing, so that you don't have a couple different styles in there. But there's no right or wrong answer, right? Not really. Any questions about that? We've looked at a few different ways to create elements. We've looked at inner HTML versus doing .create element. We kind of played with some limited functionality, with taking the value of a text area or a text input and saying like Eric, clicking a button, whatever, test. Right? Now we're creating content on the page, exactly what we've been talking about wanting to do. Right? We're using JavaScript to make this page do something magical. Tomorrow we're going to dive in and really spend a ton of time talking about event handlers. We're going to spend a ton of time, the one type of event handler we've explored to date is like putting onClick in here. But there are a bunch of other types that we can do directly from JavaScript, so that we can write JavaScript that doesn't even care what page it's on. We can use some of the functions like document dot query selector all input, right? And then we can say on every input, we can add event listeners to that, so that we can add click events to any element we want, regardless of what page we're on. So this is how we're really going to write JavaScript libraries to take advantage of, if you've got a website that's got 40 or 50 web pages on it, you might write JavaScript that says anytime I'm on a page that has a button, do something with it, right? And that's what we'll be doing with JavaScript as we go forward and move forward. But it's really building on these fundamentals that we've been working on. Anybody have any questions? Would we like to go over anything else we've covered today in more detail or more depth? We've learned about creating elements. We've learned about updating this stuff. So let's just, as a review, what if I wanted to change? Okay, let's use this as an example. I have an H1 with an ID of test. How would I get a reference to this element and put it in a variable? Let's start with you, Estrella. Tell me one way to get a reference to this variable or this element in JavaScript.
Document.getElement by ID.
Yep, and what would I put in as the argument for getElement by ID?
You would put test.
Okay, great. That's perfect. What is another way I would get that, Leah?
Document.query selector and then hashtag test.
Yep, which is the same as doing document.getElement by ID. What's another way I could do it with query selector if I wanted to get this element? What's another query selector that would get this element for us?
Could you do document? Actually, if you just did H1, wouldn't that work?
Yep. When would it not work?
If you added an H1 before it.
Yeah. If I have another one up here. Yeah. Right. Now it wouldn't work. Okay, but that's great though. So that's exactly right. What's another way I could reference it by using .query selector? What's another query selector that would be valid for this?
Could you do query selector hashtag body element and then .child or something?
No, because that wouldn't be a thing. But I could do it like this: body h1 hashtag test, or I could do body hashtag body element h1. Right, that would be another valid query selector. I could do HTML body test. Right, that would be a valid query selector. Any CSS string that takes me, from HTML to body to H1, any way I can get there, whether it's by ID, I could also do it by .look. Right, that's the first element.
So the query selector is that it uses CSS.
It's literally any of these query selectors that you can do in here. Right, so any way I can reference this element I can, maybe we can show this in here, right? Like, so more tools, developer tools, document dot query selector dot test or dot look, excuse me. Right? That's going to give me my h1 because that's the first element on this page that has that class. But I could also do, HTML body h1 dot look. Same element, same way to get there. Those are synonyms. Okay. Andrew, what if I wanted to get all the elements that had a class of look? How would I do that?
I had a question about the previous thing really quick. Does that apply to even the special query selectors, like with the root query selector or, with colon, hover, stuff like that?
Let's see. Document.query selector. Root. Yeah, it's going to give us at least the root of our page, which is our HTML element. Yeah. We can also do the other special ones, like so we have input, right? And if we do type equals text, I don't think I added a type on that, did I? Yeah, let's add a type equals text. Right, we can do any attribute with the squares, right? I reload this page.
Okay.
Yeah, it's going to get us that one. I could also do, input name equals, what do we call it? Whatever. Whatever, right? Going to get us there. Any valid CSS query selector that you can do in your CSS, you can do with query selector, and you can do with query selector all. Right? Query selector all is that second part of the question, which is get me all of them. Query selector all, dot test. That's going to give you everything that has. It's going to give us our h1, our p. Oh, dot look is what I meant to say. I gotta get better names for these generic ones, huh? So I type dot look. All right, this is going to give us all three of those elements: h1, our p, and our div. What if I wanted to just query elements by the class name? What's another way I can, look for all the elements with dot look? Do you, Selena, were you here for that? Do you know which way it is? No. Estrella, what's another way to get elements by their class name?
The document dot get elements class. Oh, I can't speak today. I'm sorry.
By class name.
Yeah.
Look. Oh, it's about to storm. Well, my windows are open. We might have to take a break here for like 3 minutes. I'll be right back. I'm gonna pause the recording real quick. Sorry about this. Staying fast. So we can also reference, get elements by class name. The important thing to note about that one is you'll notice query selector all uses the CSS query selector of dot look. Get elements by class name just needs the name. Okay. And if you put in dot look in there, it would not return anything. Okay. What if we wanted to, what is one way we would create an element? Like if we had an unordered list and we wanted to put some new LIs in there, what is one way we'd do that? Nobody knows how to create elements?
Did you do a append child?
Yeah, that's one way. But what would we put in the append child? Can we just put HTML in there? Like if we've got a document dot on my ID to-do list, right? Dot append child. Can I just put li in here? Something?
Do text content?
Text content, yeah, that's one way. But the problem with text content is it's going to replace everything that's inside of there. So if we got a UL, UL expects a bunch of LIs. So text content would let us put information in there, but it would kind of break what we think this is supposed to be a list, right? It's got a whatever in here. So if I did text content, and I
create element.
Yeah, we'd have to create an element first, for sure. So now you can see I've added text content. It's got some weird li. But the other way would be inner HTML, right? That would let us just literally replace HTML with that. And then the other way that Andrew mentioned is we'd have to create an element first, var new L equals document dot create element li. And then we want to append child with that new EL. Right? And so what we're going to see here, because I created an li, but it had no content in it, we're just going to see a dot show up, right? Because there's an li there. Wait, oh, I did it again. This is supposed to be the variable new EL, not a string. So now we see a dot. Oh, we could always go in here and say, how would I get the last child from that element, right? If I wanted to get that li, so I could start adding stuff to it. So I've got my to-do list here. What would I do to get the that last li so that I can start changing its values?
Is it dot last child?
So we do last child. Right? That is in this case, but what was the thing that we need to be most concerned about? Because it could have been text, right? Remember we had a bunch of those text nodes. So we probably want to do last element child. Was that it? Last element child is going to make sure that it's going to give us an element and not some random text node. And then we could do dot inner text equals something here. That would be one way to do it as well. What would I do if I wanted to get the URL? Does anyone remember that? It was one of the first things we covered today. Where would I get the URL from if I wanted this whole thing?
Windows location, windows.location dot href.
You are like 99.7% correct. It's window.location. Windows doesn't exist in here, so I tag windows.location. It's going to give us Windows is not fine. You are very, very close. Window.location.href is going to give us the full URL. Very good. What else can we do with window.location.href? Do you remember the cool trick we did with this earlier?
We can do the hashtag on the end.
So right now it says hello world. We could do window.location.hash equals something else. Right. And now it changed, even though we never went anywhere. What else can we do with window.location? Leah, do you have any ideas? Well, the other cool thing that we can do with window.location.href is that we can set it, right? So we can say, hey, we want to be on google.com, which will take us right to that page. Okay. So the window object has, what was our definition for, like, what is the difference between window and document? What does window cover that document does not?
The window covered the whole window, and document cover what the document you're using at that point of time.
Yeah, that's exactly perfect. The window is going to cover the entire browser of this website, right? So whatever is in here from the title on down, the location, hash names. The document is really just everything in our HTML. So if we did window.document, right? And then we type .all, right? These were all of our tags, but we could also do .body, right? So our document is the HTML page itself, everything kind of in here. And there was, some of the things, there was a little bit of overlap, like how would I set the title in here? If I wanted to change fun with Dom to something else. Because we know the title is held in our head tag, right? So that's like meta information. Go ahead, Gregory.
You did that for minutes ago in the beginning. It was I think it was window dot HTML title. Yeah.
So that's a function. Right, I don't know. That's not doing anything.
Oh, it ain't doing nothing. I thought you put the title into the parentheses.
I am. You're close. You're on the wrong object. It's on document.
Oh,
Because
document.
the title element exists within your HTML, right? So document.title, fun with DOM.
Oh,
Oh, gosh.
that makes sense because it said document when you upload it.
And if I do, Andrew is here. It's changed our title bar up here in the top. And we can change that programmatically, right? If we were building an app that was tracking our mile, right? So if Andrew's building his golf app, right, he might want to come in here and say document.title equals hole 13, right? And maybe he wants to even do it, so that it can track his strokes. So it can be like shot 2, shot 3, right? So the app can keep up with the content as you're using it, right? Leah's might want to come in here and say, royal flush. Right? So we can change and interact with these pages in interesting ways in JavaScript without ever having to leave the page. And as we learn about some of the back-end programming and doing stuff behind the scenes, we're going to use JavaScript to go and make requests to the server and update content on this page without us ever leaving the page. So, that's how Gmail works. It's going to look behind the scenes, and every 30 seconds or so, it's going to say, are there any new emails? If there are, it's going to change this number up in the title bar, and it's going to say, you have new mail, and stuff like that, right? Like, that is the kind of interactivity we can build with JavaScript with just like 2 or 3 lines of code. It doesn't take much to make products really feel like they're alive and like you've spent a lot of time on them and make them feel, like you've put some effort into it, right? Those are the kind of things that really go a long way. That's a pretty good review. How are we feeling? Anything we want to take a look at in more detail? Did anyone work on their projects over the weekend? Like their little personal apps? Any progress we want to show off?
I just cleaned up the code a little, but functionally it's still the same.
Nice. When am I going to be able to play poker against you online, huh? Pretty soon?
I don't know. I was gonna schedule time like on Friday because like there's some things I definitely need help with.
Cool. Well, let's do it this week then for sure. I don't want to move on because what we're going to cover next is really around, a lot of the event listener stuff. And there's a whole bunch to unpack there because there's a lot of events that you have to stop and cancel. And it's there's a lot of, like, when you're done with an event, how do you turn it off and turn it on? Like, we'll probably spend an hour and a half, 2 hours tomorrow talking about this. I don't want to dive into it necessarily today other than maybe it's like just a lightweight introduction and then spend more time. But is there anything else you want to cover yet? Yeah, I think that's it. So we've reached the end of today. What would we like to play with? Would we like to go over anything? Do we have any questions? Do we have help with the homework?
I'm kind of interested to see how everybody else did the homework versus the way I did it.
Okay.
Just from seeing everything with JavaScript, seeing that you can kind of approach it in different ways.
Which homework are you talking about? Because there's kind of 2 that were due today, right?
We're there.
Yeah, we're there.
Maybe I'm thinking of a different one, right? So we're on week 4, right? That was, I moved him. Yeah, conditional. Was it this one? Yeah. It was this one, right? So we're making a game. Yeah.
I use else if, and I felt gross the whole time doing it. I felt like if I used like a switch, then it would have been a lot cleaner, but I couldn't think of how to do that.
Okay. Well, how about we do this?
Yeah, I couldn't figure that out either. What
if I start writing this, and as we go, we go line by line. I explain why I write it a certain way, and then everyone else can jump in and say why they're doing something a certain way, and we can just use it as a discussion. Because one of the things that's really hard as an instructor, and especially as we start like testing and grading homework, like there's a lot of right answers here. There's no, unless it doesn't work, like there's very little wrong. Does that sound useful? I don't want to put him on the spot and be like, just like we did with Leah last time, though she volunteered, where we're like, let's look at Leah's homework and critique what's right or wrong. Same with Estrella and Andrew. You guys are more than welcome to share your version if you want, but I don't want to put anyone on the spot tonight unless you specifically would like critique.
All right, you put on the spot.
What was the question, Gregory?
You can put me on the spot.
Okay, you want us to look at yours?
Yeah, I don't care.
Okay.
Poor Andrew. He wanted to.
Andrew, you want us to look at yours as well?
It's all right. I struggled with mine for so long. I was just wondering. I'm sure there's a way better way to do certain things. So
Okay. Well, I mean, it
It's all-
seems like everybody is interested. Let's look at a few. Right? We can look at Andrew's. We can look at Gregory's. We can look at Leah's. We can write one ourselves. All right. So Gregory's sharing his screen. Perfect. I'll stop sharing mine and then stop sharing. All right. So we start off at the top. Let me read the instructions here so I make sure I'm following along here. So the very first says you're on a practice branch. Are you on a practice branch?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. You created a file named at3.js. You did. Yep. Create an object with the name of game. You did. That's one way to create an object. What is another way we can create an object?
Cut and paste. You know you was on speaker.
You got someone in the background talking to you?
Yeah, she talking about my mother. She talking about cut and paste.
That's one way to create an object. You can copy and paste. Hi, mom, or whomever. Right, so yeah, you create an object here with new object. That's like the old literal definition of like how you'd create an object. How would you create an object another way?
I literally did it for minutes ago, but I thought I did it wrong. But go ahead, Leah.
You can just do like var game equals and then put it in curly braces.
Mm-hmm.
Put the like the parameters or the not parameters but properties.
Yeah. So you can even do it both ways, right? So new object. This is correct. You could also do var game equals curly brackets, so that you've just got an empty blank object. Or you could do what I think Leah's suggesting, which is var game curly bracket, and then on the next line you'd say win colon 0 loss colon 0, so you can define the object and create it at the same time. But this is perfectly correct, right?
Cool.
And you're going to see both versions as you explore and as you program, right? So that's good. So you got a loss object, a win object, or property, win and loss. Both are set to 0. That's good. Create an array named choices, and it should have the following elements: rock, paper, scissors. You have that. Use let here instead of var. Why did you do that? What was the choice behind that? We haven't really talked much about let.
I'm not sure.
Okay. Let
I was reading one of the I'm about to say mozzarella, the browser.
Yeah. So you were using documentation that said create a variable with let. And
I was reading one of the arrays thing because I was trying to review the arrays again, and I saw that, and I used it on this one.
So let is the new, like when we're talking about ES6, which is the newest version of JavaScript, they use let most of the time instead of var, because let contains things inside of a specific scope, and var just kind of just makes a variable wherever it is.
You did say that last time.
So I would say stylistically, because we're at the stage where we've been learning var, I would just in your mind be like, if I want to make a variable of any kind, I'm going to use var until we get to the stage where we cover let and why we should use that. So I would
yes, sir.
But this is correct, right? So you did something very smart here, which is console.log, because you've said I want to make sure that I want to have choices here. But the problem is you've console.log game.choices, but choices is a variable that exists on top of window objects. So this is going to console.log nothing, right? Or it's going to say undefined or something?
It did not.
Okay.
It did not really. Let me see. I forgot to put up the server.
Did someone raise their hand, Leah? Was that you?
Yeah, it was Leah.
Yeah, wouldn't const be better than let? Because I don't think that choices gets changed at all.
Yeah, const would be the right choice in ES6 because you're never gonna you're always gonna have those 3 elements in there. So I would 100% use const. However, we haven't touched that yet, so I think it's probably more appropriate to use var. Yeah. So the very first thing it does, it logs undefined, and the reason it logs undefined is because you've said console.log game.choices, but choices is not a property of game. It is a global variable.
I should change it to
just make margaritas or something. Yeah, so, if you just wanted to have it log the choices, rock, paper, scissors, you would just put choices in there.
Okay.
Okay. Then you have get random int, and you put in a max. And so you've said return math.floor, math.random times max. So that's right? So we're going to get, you put in 3, right? Get random int 3. Get random int 3. Okay, that's smart to write it in a function. Even though we didn't ask you to do that, you went above and beyond. Good job. Then you're saying bot1's value is choices, and then either 0 to 3, right? Okay, now let's look at your if-else. Go ahead, Leah. You're muted.
So like where it says like var1 or var random1 equals and all that, and then var random2 equals all that, like is there a way to set multiple? Like is there a way to combine that into one line?
There would be, but not in a way that would be correct for the instructions, because the instructions say create 2 variables, so it's going to have to be a var random1. Now the problem with what we see here, 13 and 14, does anyone see the problem with what he's got here? On 13 or 14 specifically?
Is it the console.log?
Yeah, the problem is your get random int is what's returning your value, but you've just console.logged it. So console.log is just trying to print it to the console, which it's doing. And you can see your console says 2 and 0, but you haven't assigned those to random1 and random2. And if you went into your console over on the left and you typed in random1 right now, it's going to probably have null or undefined or some other behavior, right? So just type random1. Yep, undefined. So you never actually assigned the value of get random int to random1 or random2 because you console.logged it. Does that make sense?
Yes.
So
But I didn't know.
Yeah.
I wasn't sure what I was thinking. I just thought that would be correct.
Mm-hmm.
But
that's close. I mean, so you might very well want to log those values, but you should probably assign those values first to random1 and random2, and then on the line below it, log those values with console.
Oh, okay. So I would use the same command, but have that in a separate.
Console.log is perfectly right. Whatever's in console.log is going to be printed on that console, but you have to have assigned it first. So random1 and random2, the reason it says undefined is because console.log does not return anything. It's a function that does nothing but print. It doesn't return a value. So now your bot1 and your bot2, your choices below there. Yeah, you have to take out that extra parenthesis. I should stop the recording.